Both bicycle and pedestrian accidents are all too common in Oregon, particularly in the larger cities. And it's really unfortunate. Those cases are actually different than your standard motor vehicle case. Most of the time, there are competing statutes. So for example, if you're a pedestrian in a crosswalk, one, you would have the right of way, right? If you're in a crosswalk, you have the right of way if the light's in your favor. However, another statute says, despite having the right of way, you still have to look out for your own safety. In other words, look to see if a car is about to run the red light and make sure you get out of the way. So the laws are really kind of competing. One says the driver's responsible because they didn't yield right away to you. The other one says you're responsible because you didn't keep a proper lookout. So those often mesh together and create a situation where the jury has to consider what's called comparative negligence. Who's at fault, what percentage at fault. But the important part there is to know that as a pedestrian, you have obligations over and above simply having the right of way and walking out in front of traffic. If that traffic was violating the law, not yielding the right of way, running a red light, taking a right on red, so on and so forth. And we handle a ton, unfortunately, just a ton of these cases where people, particularly in crosswalks, are hit by cars making a turn on a red light and just mow the poor person down. And it's really unfortunate, and inevitably the insurance companies try to point fingers at our client, and we've been very, very successful in preventing those types of arguments from gaining any traction. But if you don't have the law at your side, don't have a legal understanding of what's required, how to analyze the statutes, analyze the case law that is based on those statutes, it's a real uphill battle if you're simply out there trying to do it alone. Similarly, bicycles are interesting in that bicycles by code, in other words, by the vehicle code, have to adhere to the vehicle laws to the extent it applies to bicycles. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means just what it says. If the vehicle code can apply to a bicycle, for example, you must stop at a stop sign, then it applies to the bicycle. Okay. If the vehicle code does not apply to the bicycle, for example, you need working headlights, then it doesn't apply to the bicycle. So it's an interesting situation where you really have to be knowledgeable in terms of what portions of the vehicle code apply to bikes versus what doesn't. And even the vehicle code that applies to bikes, for example, it says, no riding the wrong way down a two-way street. Well, that's true to a point, but however, there are circumstances that could justify that behavior relative to a bicycle where it wouldn't justify that behavior relative to a vehicle. So again, having that legal knowledge base to understand, apply, make the right arguments, and get the folks past the finish line is imperative. And it's awfully difficult to do that, even for lawyers, unless they specialize like we do in the area.